In the last section, we discussed the difficulties that journalists and global muckrakers face. Sometimes these are hard pressures, sometimes they're soft pressures like lack of money. We're going to end this course on a high note. We're going to talk about some of the great changes that have happened to journalism, some of the dramatic events and results in changing in technology and funding that have really benefited journalists around the world. The changes have been dramatic and quick in recent years. The way that people receive information and consume information has been transformed, and so have the practices of journalism. We're now in a period where there's an enormous amount of choice if you want it. There's old forms of journalism coexisting with the new forms, and lots of ways to find out what's going on in the world. Both format and content, there's a huge amount of availability. If you want to read an old Sunday newspaper, as people used to do, you certainly can. But if you want to get headlines on your mobile phone, you can do that as well. So it's really a rich period with a lot of choice at the moment. There's a lot of variety, connectivity, information, and very fine reporting for people who want it. In fact, we can say there's really an abundance of global muckraking if you know where to look and you feel like doing the hunting. Sheila Coronel says that we're really in a golden age of investigative journalism. That's going to be the subject of today's discussion. We're going to talk about why we're in a golden period of investigative journalism, and I would argue that there's really 5 reasons that that's the case. The first is that social media and digital technology has connected journalists all over the world. Remember the global muckrakers of the 19th century and how isolated they were? They couldn't really find out what was happening. It took years to figure out about the conditions in the Congo or what was going on with the cocoa farmers that were supplying Cadbury. Now today, those problems of documentation and verification that muckrakers used to spend so much time on have just gotten a lot simpler. It's easier to really find out what's going on. Today, with the internet, journalists are far more connected. The second reason to be cheerful is big data. Not only are journalists less isolated, but they can get enormous amounts of information online. And this is really changing the way a lot of muckraking investigations are happening. Many of the most recent high-profile stories, such as the Panama Papers, were based on huge leaks of big data and information. We'll be talking more about that and more about big data later on in this week and why it really has affected what it means to be a journalist today. The third reason to be cheerful is political transition towards democracy in some countries. Political transition and movements to democracy have always helped journalism, at least in the short term. When you think of how governments have changed in places like Ghana after Jerry Rawlings, or Indonesia after Suharto, or Spain after Franco, or France after World War II, or many of the Latin American countries, there's usually an initial flowering with all kinds of media outlets that suddenly sort of open up. And many of them don't last, but they open up and the climate changes. And that has a knock-on effect with other countries. And the same is true today. Of course, there are many places where the climate for journalism has gone backwards and there's lots of repression and new pressures, but there's many places where things have opened up. Tunisia and the Arab Spring would be an example. Myanmar and the transition of the government there. And that had a knock-on effect. When things changed in Myanmar, it affected Singapore as well. Egypt is having a hard time right now, but again, huge flowering of the media after what happened in 2011. We've already talked about the places where things are getting worse, places like Ecuador, Hungary, Turkey, Venezuela. There are lots of countries that are clamping down on free speech. Then there's countries that have been clamping down on the short term, like China. But overall, if you look over the last 20 or 30 years, thanks to technology, things are open there. Those closed systems are slowly being pried open. Vietnam would be another example. So on balance, I think there are reasons to be cheerful about the effect the political transition has had on the media in many countries around the world. The internet, of course, has made it just much harder to control news and information, and lots more stuff comes out on social media as well. So the fourth reason to be optimistic may seem counterintuitive. And that is the layoffs of the older generation of journalists. Clearly, as part of that generation, I hate to see journalists losing their jobs. And it's been tough. Many parts of the world, the older journalists have lost their jobs as media houses have contracted. But what this has meant is that a lot of them who still care passionately about journalism have a huge amount of expertise, institutional knowledge, and know-how, have teamed up with the next generation to work on innovative websites and muckraking outlets all over the world. So when you look at some of the great investigative journalism groups, associations, consortiums, like the Global Investigative Journalism Network, or the ICIJ, which did the Panama Papers, Scoop, Investigative Reporters and Editors, the Forum for African Investigative Reporting, many of those organizations have older, experienced journalists with lots of know-how teaming up with younger reporters who understand technology, and together they're producing extraordinary investigations. I don't know how long it's going to last. Many of them are getting money from donors and from philanthropists, but it's something that we can really celebrate at the moment. So I think that's really important. That brings us to our sort of final crucial point, which is the role of funding and the role of philanthropy. Now, we know from this course that donors have often helped behind the scenes, or even in front of the scenes, have often helped global muckrakers and partnered with them and funded with them in many ways. An early example would be the way that the abolitionists funded newsletters and newspapers that campaigned against slavery. And they also helped E.D. Morel in his work on the Congo. Trade unions founded and funded many newspapers in the 19th century. So there's a long tradition. What's happening now around the world is that there are large foundations, some of which we'll be talking about this week, and some governments, and even some private donors who are funding journalism in many countries, and they're putting in millions of dollars. So this is a huge, important thing that has happened to journalism. There are, of course, risks and some disadvantages, and we'll be talking about that. But the main point to sort of flag here is that the donor money has had a big effect on the media climate. One of the ways that they're changing how people think about journalism relates directly to this course, which is that whole question of impact. We've talked a lot about when does global muckraking make a difference and when it doesn't, and what are the conditions that have to be in place. Well, one of the things about donors is they really care about impact. Many donors have gone into philanthropy because they want to change the world, and so they're looking very often for proof that the journalism they're funding is making a difference, and they have benchmarks that they like to look at, and they want often a guarantee that their investments are making a difference. So that's something to think about. It's changing how we think about impact, and it's certainly having an effect. But we'll be talking about that more later. I think the final sort of words that I want to leave you with for this section are that remember that those small outlets and that one lone crusader who does global muckraking can make an enormous difference. If history has taught us anything, it's that the outlets come and go, but the legacy of great investigative reporting and the tradition that inspires future generations of crusading journalists endures. In short, there are 5 reasons why some people argue that global muckraking is in a golden age: social media and digital technology, big data, political transition, the older generation with expertise and knowledge teaming up with younger journalists, and the support of philanthropists and donors around the world.